the beginning. So we can start recording from here. So hi everyone, thanks for joining. So this is the third of the 3 AI governance sessions that we're doing as part of the Sustainable Procurement Pledge Emerging Technology. Very much thanks to Edmund and Ben for organising this and taking us through. And we've got a couple of great extra people coming in today. So very excited in what we're going to hear over the next hour or so. So just a couple of quick things. So I'm Matt Langley, the co-chair of the Emerging Technology chapter. And slides should have worked. And just a quick reminder that given some of us have or work in the same industries and are competitors, the discussion today is around helping all of us improve, but we just do need to be a little bit careful around some of the competitive comments that could be made. So just check those. And a reminder for the Sustainable Procurement Pledge, the aim is that we have 1 million procurement professionals by 2030 who have signed to be an ambassador and to really push sustainable sourcing decisions throughout our function and therefore throughout the business world. There are 3 different types of Sustainable Procurement Pledge chapters. We've got a country one, a topic one, which is where the emerging technology sits, and then an industry-led one as well. And if you haven't joined already, please do, and please join the LinkedIn community we have for emerging technology. We want to grow that through and be part of that 1 million that we want to aim for by 2030. So please join up when you can. Okay, Edmund, let me stop sharing and I'll pass over to you and Ben.
Hey, thanks so much, Matt. And we're excited to be here for part 3 of this series on AI governance. This series is for procurement and sourcing professionals to get smart on navigating AI questions in non-tech, non-software categories. And today we'll be talking about autonomous vehicles in a number of different procurement categories. We have 2 very special guests joining us. But first, I'm going to introduce myself, and then I'll take the opportunity to invite my co-host, Dr. Ben Room, to introduce himself. So for those who this is an introduction. My name is Edmund Zagarian. I'm the founder and chief strategy officer of Orchestro. We are the leading predictive procurement orchestration platform. We help enterprise manufacturers predict and win better prices across all of their quoted spend. And we are keenly interested in topics related to artificial intelligence, how it's changing procurement and supply chain. And for this, we are partnering through a nonprofit organization called the AI Objectives Institute, which we'll talk a little bit more about during the presentation. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Ben. And Dr. Ben, would you say a little bit about your background and welcome to the webinar?
Thanks, Edmund. Really appreciate it. I am Ben Rome. I am the co-founder of an AI ethics consultancy called Ethical Resolve. We have been in business for the last 10 years, helping our clients to develop responsible AI governance structures. And I have been brought into the world of procurement by Edmund and learned a lot about how AI transformation is working, and really excited to be part of this because I think responsible AI transformation critically must live with an organization's procurement professionals. And so it's great to be able to connect with this audience and learn from you about how you are handling AI transformation at your organization. Go ahead and pass it back there. Thanks, Edmund.
Awesome. And now I'd like to invite our AI Supply Chain Observatory practitioner and executive in residence, Dr. Charlotte de Brabant. Could you introduce yourself and say a little bit about your background?
You're muted, Charlotte.
Of course I am. It's normal nowadays. Hi, everyone. My name is Charlotte de Brabant, and I've been in the field of supply chain management and procurement for the last 17 years. I've worked in 5 industries across 3 continents, and from automotive, consumer goods, medical devices, pharma, technology, and timepieces. And I've been very much involved in the topic of AI, currently looking after all of our IT vendors, specifically in the field of automotive, but at my company. But also amongst that, I've had quite a lot of exposure just in looking at sustainability, AI, the future of procurement supply chain management at a variety of different other companies. And I'm a book author and TED speaker and speaker at many other procurement conferences. So it's a great pleasure to be here.
And thank you, Charlotte. We're glad that you're able to join and share your perspective. And we now have another special guest joining us to give a perspective not just on AI governance more holistically, but also with some expertise around autonomous vehicles. Ben Levin, welcome to the webinar. Would you mind introducing yourself and saying a little bit about your background?
Sure. My name is Ben Levin. I'm a director of engineering at Scale AI and the general manager of our autonomous vehicles and computer vision business unit. Scale, just for anyone who doesn't have the context, is a supplier in the AI industry that has worked across the whole chain of autonomous vehicle suppliers. Our customers include manufacturers of components like LiDARs used in autonomous perception, many of the self-driving or ADAS programs inside of large OEMs, including 3 of the top 5 in the world, and working with several of the top robotaxi programs that are doing fully autonomous driverless operation.
Thanks, Ben. We appreciate you joining us today to share a perspective. And so with that, we are going to introduce, or I should say, for those who have seen the first 2 parts of this series, we're going to reintroduce the AI Supply Chain Observatory risk scopes concept. We're going to do that lightning quick, because if you want a deeper dive, you can watch parts 1 or part 2 of this webinar series for a more in-depth look. And then we're going to go right into use cases. So practical cases where AI in this area could intersect with a procurement sourcing person's everyday workflow. So with that, I am going to go ahead and share my screen. And you can see, have this here pulled up, put it in slideshow mode. And so we are going to, we've done introductions. We're going to look at why this topic is relevant for procurement teams today and why procurement teams are making this topic relevant to executives. We're going to look at the risk scopes framework, and then we're going to go right into the case studies. Content warning, there are images of car accidents that may be disturbing to some viewers. If that is an issue, you should be advised ahead of time that this presentation does contain, I believe, 1 or 2 images. All right. So introduction, what is ASCO? The AI Supply Chain Observatory. It is a project and research area of the AI Objectives Institute, which is a nonprofit research lab working to ensure that both AI and future economic systems are built and deployed with genuine human objectives at their core, enabled by broad public input and scalable cooperation. It is a 501c3 organization based here in the Bay Area in the United States, and we support a range of research activities into foundational AI research associated with governance, ethics, and safety. So you're a procurement person, you manage a category, you run a sourcing team. What's in it for you? Well, we want to position you with some talking points you can take back to your team for why AI in non-tech categories creates opportunities. And to give you just one example, we'll look at call centers. This is not traditionally a tech category, but over the past year, people that have deployed agentic AI have shown that these centers operate with identical or even better service levels and significantly lower costs. So as a procurement or category manager, you may be thinking, lower costs, that should be passed along to my business. And so the question that you are now facing is, will these savings be captured as increased profit margin for your supplier or overall better economics by your enterprise procurement team? And the answer to that is going to be determined by how proficient your team and your organization is able to leverage tools relevant to responsible AI governance. Now, how do we think about AI governance? Well, our focus is not per se on all of AI, but really understanding third-party AI risk. So you can think about 3 buckets of AI risk. Scope 1 is for people that develop AI models. Unless you work at Google or OpenAI or a handful of other companies, you do not have this risk because your company is not actually developing a foundational model that's going to be used in making decisions or generating content or helping to navigate a vehicle, for example. Scope 2 is employee use. This is employee use of AI products created by other companies, but used directly by employees within your workflow. So a lot of large enterprises, as discussed in previous instances of this webinar series, have taken efforts to ban the use of AI by their employees with varying degrees of success. However, those policies really govern Scope 2 AI risk. And Scope 3 is when a supplier uses AI on behalf of your organization with or without your knowledge. And the purpose of this webinar series, and specifically the SPP's AI governance program, is to help procurement teams develop RFP questions, supplier governance policies, risk audits, and other tools that can be used in identifying and reducing this Scope 3 supplier AI use risk. To access the benefits of responsible AI and the performance improvements and cost reductions delivered by suppliers, procurement teams adopt governance to ensure values alignment, limiting principles, and put humans in the loop for specific tasks. And they're developing tools today to be used with suppliers, AI risk audits, and supplier AI governance policies. Many of these policies require or request a reciprocal policy be created by the supplier, cascading the chain of governance down to second and third tiers. And so with that introduction, we're now going to dive into the focus of this webinar, which is really logistics, freight, and employee travel. So before we go deep into this case study, I want to, since we have some expert panelists here with us, put the question to you, Ben Levin. Can you give us a little bit of a perspective from what you've seen about what is different between, I think you used the term ADAS or assistant driving. Can you unpack that a little bit and explain to our audience what is the difference between this system and newer systems that are coming online?
Sure. Fundamentally, I would break down the spectrum of self-driving capabilities into 2 categories. The first is what you might call driver assistance systems. You probably have one of these on your car today if it's been produced in the last 5 years or so. This is everything from lane keeping to automatic stopping to emergency braking. But in all of these systems, they're framed as driver assistance, and it's very clear that ultimately the driver is expected to remain alert and is responsible for anything that happens to the car. So the automotive here is trying to help the driver, but basically the driver still has responsibility. There is a whole spectrum of perspectives on what makes these systems safe or not safe and the ethics around them. As is sometimes the case, Europe has a regulatory framework specifically around driver assistance systems with specific benchmarks that they need to hit to be deployable. The United States has taken a much more laissez-faire approach and effectively lets most automakers decide themselves what kind of driver assistance they want to deploy. The other spectrum of self-driving or autonomy is what you would call true robotaxis or unsupervised self-driving. And this is primarily the case where you as the user do not have to be looking at the road. And in this case, the manufacturer of the vehicle or the provider of the service is going to end up taking liability if something happens. This is primarily still about robotaxis that have been deployed by Waymo and others in a few US cities, but you are now seeing some cases, Mercedes-Benz, for example, deployed a level 3 self-driving system that in some cases will allow you to take your hands off the wheel, take your eyes off the road, and if you get in an accident, Mercedes-Benz is then liable.
Thanks for that. That's super helpful. And I think that just to double click on that, so in this case, the maker of the car is taking liability.
Yeah, I mean, it broadly varies by jurisdiction and by the sort of exact economic operating model. But I think the place at which, there have been a lot of AI concerns, or let's say ethics concerns, is actually when this thing gets blurry. So if you advertise to me that this car is going to drive itself, and some of these cars now you can see on San Francisco, they don't even have a steering wheel. It's literally impossible for me to drive them in any meaningful sense. And you get into an accident, then it's very clear that I, as the occupant of the vehicle, am not liable. And as a practical matter, everyone's going to come after whoever's providing that service. So far, that's been pretty much the manufacturer or developer of these technologies. Where you get into sort of a tricky situation is in some of the driver assistance services that do in fact offer a high degree of autonomy. I mean, they can change lanes by themselves, they can start and stop by themselves, they brake. And in these cases, even if it's, warned to the user that they're ultimately liable for anything that happens on the road, in practice, there is a little bit of a fuzzy zone that develops the more you give control to the car and the autonomy system, and the less control you give to the driver. So probably one, well-known example of this is Tesla's advertised full self-driving technology, which has not to date been full self-driving, but still is driver assistance, but does do an impressive job of handling many road tasks. And you can find examples of people who have gotten into accidents in full self-driving mode, and they feel that Tesla should be liable rather than they themselves, the driver.
That's super interesting. And Dr. Ben, I'm gonna come to you next on this, but I want to go a little bit further in our first scenario, because as we're talking with procurement professionals in many cases in large enterprises, we believe that the most likely initial scenario of kind of first contact with AI in this form is likely not to be that the employee has gotten permission to take a ride in one of these robo-taxis, but they happen to be driving their own vehicle or a vehicle they've leased or rented for work purposes in a jurisdiction where these vehicles are operating and potentially get into a collision. So, and by the way, we're going to mention a couple of cases related to Tesla, related to a couple other companies. I want to be clear, in all of these cases, what we're doing is we're harvesting headlines, because in practice, for a lot of procurement teams, the way these issues get introduced is some executive comes in and goes, "Hey, I read this. How are we covered on this topic?" And so this is really in the frame of, here's how you can navigate that. So let's go into our first case. So this is a guy named Joshua Brown, and he was a huge fan of Tesla, and wanted to test some of the advanced features associated with full self-driving, and got into an accident and died. And this triggered a huge amount of research into the role that the models might have played in directing, not necessarily just directing the car in specific ways on the highway, but also the structure of liability and responsibility surrounding the accident, and whether or not, as Ben stated, Tesla or the developer of the model would be liable in this case. And part of the reason that people have begun thinking about this is that now there are lots of cases where these types of vehicles are available in other form factors, such as semi-trucks. And in fact, there are models of what's known as driver-out semi-trucks that are already on the road, in some cases doing test drives on public roads, in some cases fully deployed on private roads. And this raises this question of ethics and responsibility. In the case of an accident, who or what is liable, as Alexis Madrigal from The Atlantic phrases it. And so if your employee goes to Los Angeles and needs to meet a client and rents a car and gets into an accident, they have a hired and non-owned auto liability policy as insurance, which is a classic form of insurance for work-related car rentals. In this scenario, the employee is not injured, but the vehicle is damaged. How does the employee file an insurance claim? And as a procurement team, how should you advise employees on navigating this situation? So for this one, I want to go to Charlotte. How would you, if an employee came to you with this scenario, how would you advise them to think about the right process to follow or the right next steps to take?
Excellent question. And I was actually thinking about that question just over Thanksgiving when I was in Phoenix and surrounded by really autonomous vehicles, trying to rent one myself. But so before renting a car in an area where autonomous vehicles operate, so topics that I do communicate.
Hey, Charlotte, I'm so
with
sorry.
my
We're having a
employees,
connection
for
issue.
example, they should be thoroughly
Charlotte, I'm so sorry. Your audio is
aware
cutting in and out. So I'm gonna just mute you
of
for a second and
AV
see if it's possible for you to
and
rejoin the call.
and that they do
Oh, it's
operate in this
not an option right
area. So I think that's number one.
Matt, do you
Raising
have
awareness.
moderation
Yeah.
tools here?
Yeah, I do, but I think Charlotte's picked it up now.
Okay, perfect. All right, Charlotte, we'll work on the technical issue and we'll come back to you on this one. But I'm very curious what your experience in Phoenix was going through that process. I'd love to go to Dr. Ben. Dr. Ben, could you give us some sense from like the principles and kind of governance here? What would you like to understand about the agents involved in this scenario in order to help guide people that are navigating this process?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think I have the same kind of expertise that would like lead me to be able to ask the right questions here. I am interested, to hear potentially from Ben Levin about the way that computer vision functions inside autonomous vehicles, because a lot of the times that we hear about problems being caused by autonomous vehicles, it's actually because the computer vision, the sensor system, failed to identify a threat. I think in the case of the guy who was unfortunately killed in his Tesla, he hit a semi that the computer vision system in the vehicle was incapable of differentiating from a white sky in the background. And so, yeah, Ben, I wonder if you have thoughts about like, do you, when you hear about accidents or when you run across these questions, is it more a question of the decision-making system in the vehicle, or is it usually more an issue of the computer vision sensors that are tasked with identifying threats, or also humans on the road?
Yeah, I can give a perspective on that. I think the answer is often that it's a mixture of both. And what I mean by that is it's often the interplay between the detection system and the prediction and planning systems that try and understand the overall road environment and create the best path for the vehicle to follow. Just to give some well-known examples from the industry, and these are all sort of matters of public record now. When Uber unfortunately got into a collision in Arizona in which a woman was killed, one of the core problems was not that she wasn't picked up by the detection systems, but it was a woman who was walking a bike. And the detection system alternated rapidly between identifying this person as a bicyclist and a pedestrian. And because of that, was unable to create a path, and she basically became then invisible to the self-driving system. There are other examples for, just to give like another quick example. There was an accident caused in California with GM's Cruise unit, which has now been shut down, and we can talk about that, in which it identified a two-part bus, an articulated bus, and attempted to predict the path of the front of the bus versus the back of the bus, which it could see. Once it could no longer see the front of the bus, it just assumed that front of the bus kept moving and then crashed straight into the back. So there are a lot of perception issues still. There are all sorts of long tail edge cases where people are trying to find out, in low light conditions with extreme sun glare, with different occlusion of objects, is there these objects just straightforwardly not detected? But then there are also plenty of cases where the details of the detection system cause some unintended consequence downstream in the software. From a governance and ethics perspective, I think there's a lot of movement within the industry to try to understand the right level of validation each layer of this stack needs to go through. But ultimately, there is, a manufacturer or an operator of this self-driving system that should take responsibility for the end-to-end performance. It's very hard to sort of say, well, this particular crash was caused by the perception system. This one was by the planning system. This one was a controls issue. You kind of need to look at these systems holistically in terms of the level of safety they're able to offer.
Thanks. That's a great answer. It looks like Charlotte's back now. So maybe we can hear from you. Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. I feel like
I really hope the connection is better.
Yes, you sound great. Yeah.
Perfect. So you asked what should an enterprise tell its employees before renting a car in an area where they have autonomous vehicles around, and altogether, it's first educating the employee on AVs in general. I would say definitely educating them that they operate in the area and understand also their whole potential behavior on the road, doing pre-research, because autonomous vehicles just may have different driving patterns. Also understanding the local laws and guidelines. This is something that I discovered in Phoenix. So really encouraging the employees to get familiar with themselves, with the local laws, and then also just understanding that when you do have an autonomous vehicle around you, how they drive. So when I was testing, trying to get closer to the autonomous vehicle or trying to just play some pranks, just going in front of it. And I really realized that the reaction time was a lot slower. And actually, it did not react at all to my spontaneous games. So, so this is just really important for employees to know. Driving they should be reminded, I think, to drive defensively around AVs. And then the whole collision protocols, informing them of proper procedure, what to do to follow in case of a collision, how to identify whether another vehicle was autonomous, and making and just being aware constantly. And then also the whole topic of then insurance considerations. So ensuring that the employees are aware of how the rent-to-car insurance policy actually addresses the incidents involving AVs, and knowing how to document regarding filing the claim. So I think in general, education is just truly important.
Well, Charlotte, I think that's a great practical list that people can walk away with. So I think really appreciate your perspective. I also love that you personally have tested, seemingly tested the
on
limits
Thanksgiving. I tried
on Thanksgiving of some AVs yourself. So that's quite intriguing. So we're going to wrap up this topic because we have two more exciting cases to cover. Thanks to our expert panelists. We have two other bullet points for those watching. In terms of filing a claim, you can see, by the way, this is a Waymo with the LiDAR that Ben was alluding to earlier. Tips for employees: take a photo of the license plate. If you are in a accident, AVs should stop, but may not. And if police arrive, they may not adhere to requests to stop, depending on the circumstances of the encounter. And note the brand of the owner manufacturer. They are responsible for paying the claim, and your insurance will have to contact the manufacturer in order to seek reimbursement. In California, the law for autonomous vehicles is that each vehicle has a minimum of $5 million in liability insurance. And so in the event that you are in an accident involving an autonomous vehicle, please make sure to note which company has deployed the vehicle that you've had an encounter or incident with. And so with that, we're going to go on to case number 2. By the way, we have 3 cases in total. So we'll spend a little bit of time on this, and then we'll get to the last one, which involves ships. So in this, we're going to talk about the middle mile. This is part of the supply chain that not everyone knows about, but it's critically important because around 80% of all goods move over the ocean freight, which means that they move through a port terminal. And to get the goods out of a port terminal, one is typically using a middle mile provider. Sometimes these are called drayage providers. And this is an area where autonomous trucks are flourishing. And so the autonomous trucks are flourishing here because in many cases, these trucks only have to drive on private roads. And so these roads can be regulated in much different ways than public roads can. And they can offer a lot of opportunities for these vehicles to drive to add efficiencies in the cargo moving process. So scenario 2, your company's shipping product via ocean freight. The dray provider gets an autonomous truck to load and transport your product from the port terminal, and your management team asks you to provide carrier compliance documentation for your port operations. What should you be asking your dray provider for as far as due diligence around the type of autonomous semi or other light truck that they might be using? So that is the scenario we're going to look at just for a few minutes. And so let's imagine for a second that you are having a conversation with one of your suppliers, and they say, we have now the option of moving some port cargo through AV. We're planning to offer this to you. What questions immediately come to mind? And I want to start this one actually where we ended the last one with our procurement expert here and negotiation expert, Dr. Charlotte. Would you help our audience think through this from the procurement side of the table?
Sure, you're too kind. All right, so a very interesting case, this one that you picked. So procurement teams, I believe, should be firstly, again, educated, fully aware, and in terms of the key documents that they should be asking for is definitely, firstly, proof of insurance. They should, include general, the whole general liability insurance and specific coverage, especially for autonomous vehicles, and covering potential accidents or damages or liabilities associated with AV operations, but also other documents that I think are also important is, for example, the whole vehicle registration compliance certificate. They also have another documentation that I see on a regular basis is the whole safety and risk management. That is something providers should supply these safety protocols related to autonomous truck operations, and also including risk assessments, emergency procedures, incidents response plans. So this is really important. And just other certificates that I come across is, for example, autonomous vehicle operator certificates. So while AVs don't have human drivers to operate, there may still be operational staff involved or remote monitoring that we should consider, but also the whole operational policies and procedures. So the provider should provide detailed documentation how autonomous trucks operate within the port, or you are mentioning the private roads, and other, just to shorten my answer, just two other points is, for example, maintenance and inspection records. I think this is really important for autonomous trucks. They should definitely undergo regular maintenance and inspection checks just to make sure that it's all functioning properly. And procurement teams should request up-to-date records of these inspections, just to ensure that from a compliance perspective, that we are all safe and up to date. And then lastly, any contractual terms regarding autonomous vehicle usage, including maybe any specific clauses related to the use of the AVs in our logistics contract, or outlining liability, maintenance responsibilities. So yeah, these are just a list of just low-hanging fruits, which documents are necessary that procurement teams should be asking for.
Thank you, Charlotte. That is a great list for people to bite down on, and I think yeah, gives people a place to get started. Ben Levin, I'm going to come to you next, and I want to give you the opportunity to take a contrarian position here, if you so choose. What should we know about the benefits of this technology, and some of the ways that potentially autonomous technology and things like trucks could make us safer and easier, and we should be a little bit skeptical of things that might make the technology take longer to adopt, or that might slow down its use.
It's a great provocation, Edmund. I think what I would primarily say, and I don't know if this is a contrarian point of view or not, I think it might even be additive to the discussion so far, is that in practice, when dealing with autonomous technology, I think what's most important is to understand the actual levels of risk, of compliance, of responsibility, in each layer of this system. So look, if in this particular case, if your company is shipping product via ocean freight and your drayage provider says, hey, by the way, we're now using autonomous vehicle delivery within this port, I think you have to really ask yourself the question, from your perspective as the purchaser, just how do you evaluate this? Has your risk level increased? If anything, your risk level may have decreased, not just because these autonomous technologies, they might be safer, they might not be safer, but your counterparties are certainly more risk averse, better resourced, and less likely to have, say, a breach of insurance than just if you're dealing with a human counterparty. In practice, I would, assuming for a moment that I had a vehicle collision, the risk of the other driver being uninsured is exponentially higher than the risk of the autonomy company being uninsured. So what I would primarily look at here is, I think there are scenarios in which there are real risks, and those scenarios often relate when there's a deeper level of engagement. For example, many of these self-driving trucking companies announce partnerships with large retailers or large industrial companies. I think you showed an example of Gatik there earlier, which is one of these companies. They have a number of announced partnerships. If a Gatik truck gets into an accident and it's carrying Walmart produce, for example, and Walmart has invested in Gatik and put their brand on the line, I think that's a different kind of risk. Otherwise, honestly, I think you should look at your supply chain partners a little bit more holistically and not apply too much special scrutiny or try and get too deep into the self-driving operations if there are some.
I think that's an interesting perspective, because I think the procurement profession, when emerging technology comes up, the first instinct is to say, well, what are the risks and how could this create problems, and what do I need to do to make sure that this doesn't bite us? And what do I need to do to educate my stakeholders to prevent something bad from happening? Whereas the reason this technology is coming online in the first place is because it creates a really transformative opportunity, not just for value creation, but for, in some ways, entirely new operating models. And I think we're only beginning to conceive of what businesses look like, let alone the United States as a country, or in fact, other nations would look like if people did not have to drive behind the wheel of a vehicle. There's so much of our world that assumes that, or takes it as a given. We're going to go into a couple best practices from the state of California. Again, this is a nascent area that is evolving quite quickly. And then, Dr. Ben, I'm going to come to you last for any comments you have about what we're seeing from the overall risk approach taken here. So one of the recommended questions is, what level of autonomy is being used for the vehicle? So if you are providing autonomous vehicles, are they level 3? Are they level 4? And in some cases, different operating licenses need to be obtained for different levels of autonomy. Is the vehicle a light vehicle or heavy duty? This will also implicate the type of documents required. Also, if the vehicle is being used on public or private roads, or both. In this case, we've talked about private roads, but we want to understand that explicitly from the dray provider. And we also want to know whether or not these are operating under a testing permit, which many autonomous vehicles are today, or if they have a deployment permit. And we want to understand if this deployment permit is geographically restricted, as is the case with many of these AV deployments. Two other questions that are being asked by regulators and could be asked by procurement teams. Does the vehicle possess an external microphone to enable communication with first responders during emergency? In other words, if there's a fire or a flood or some other disaster, and first responders from the fire department, police department, EMTs arrive on the scene, can they communicate with the vehicle? And is there a remote driver or remote assistant available to take over and grab the wheel in cases where the autonomous system fails, doesn't know what to do, or acts suboptimally? This last question potentially opens up several more about the qualifications and the amount of attention that these potential remote assistants have to pay for an individual vehicle. And state of California proposes understanding how many simultaneous vehicles are being managed by each RD or RA, given the case. So with that, I want to, we're going to go to case 3 in just a sec and talk about chips. But I want to ask Dr. Ben, what principles do you see at play here in terms of how the state of California is thinking about limiting and enabling this technology from an ethics and safety standpoint?
Yeah, can you go back to the list for me, Edmund? I think what I'm seeing here that I like is that they're conducting a pretty standard risk assessment, right? What are the key failure points, and how would we mitigate those failure points if one were to come to pass, right? Particularly when we're talking about the external microphone that would enable communication with first responders, right? Like, what are the fail safes in place if this system makes an error? And for instance, it has collided with a vehicle that has a human inside of it, and that person is trapped. Would this system be capable of being asked to reverse out of this situation in order to make space for first responders to access the scene of the accident, et cetera? And so I think, it's like, right, when we encounter a failure state, what happens next, right? Does the system just shut down? Does it stop making decisions? And what sorts of modes of interaction can we engage in after we encounter a failure state? I also like these questions because I think they're just asking for transparency. And maybe, I would even go deeper here and ask how this company does its governance practices, right? Is it engaging in algorithmic impact assessments? Is it allowing third-party algorithmic auditors to come in and look at the systems that it has deployed, and just see what sorts of answers the company is ready to provide when it comes to these types of questions, right? How are you engaging in your own internal risk management and due diligence when it comes to these things? And then see what sorts of documentation they're ready to provide, right? I think there's a key component, right? There are lots of different frameworks for looking at the ethics of algorithmic systems, but the fairness, accountability, transparency model is one of the most well accepted. And so I think the extent to which companies are ready to foreground their own internal practices is a really good measure. And I see the state of California sort of taking those first steps towards risk mitigation. What I'd like to see is a little bit more depth when it comes to transparency and governance.
Absolutely. And I think if you go back to the ASCO scopes framework, values alignment, limiting principles, human in the loop. And I think you're seeing all of that in the way that groups are thinking about how to create governance, where you're saying, does the vehicle system that I'm choosing for my partner align with my values and the values of my company? Do I understand how these systems are making decisions? And do I think they reflect the values that I would use to make decisions, or that I would expect a human acting on my behalf to make decisions? Are there limiting principles? Are there edge cases or cases where we want to remove or have a human take over in that case? And do we have a human in the loop for failure states? So I think it really goes back to this kind of core governance framework that people are using to really understand how their suppliers are using these systems. And with that, we're going to go to the third and final case. This one's going to be a super fast one, but I just thought it was fun to show this technology. Ships. Yes, ships. So just like there are autonomous vehicles on land, there are autonomous ships. And in fact, this technology has been making pretty significant strides. It's not yet cost competitive with other forms of shipping, which is why it's not being kind of blasted across the headlines in a lot of commercial updates. But the technology is progressing in terms of its capability nonetheless. This is Soleil. It is a ferry in Japan. It conducted a 240-kilometer voyage fully autonomously, and it uses technology similar to self-driving cars, but critically, it enables things like automatic avoidance maneuvers that have to be really foreseen fairly well in advance. Turning a big ship takes some advanced planning, and then also all of the steps necessary to dock are part of this capability. And so scenario 3, company is shipping a product via ocean freight. Freight provider is using an autonomous ship. Your cargo is damaged by weather during transport. What should you do? We are going to, for this one, Ben, we're going to give you any word on this you want, and then any message to the procurement profession that you'd like to leave as part of this webinar.
What a question. An autonomous ship. I think, again, I mean, your primary recourse here is to your freight provider. And their recourse may be to whatever service provider or technology provider created this autonomous ship in the first place. Given obviously in this scenario, your company's shipping product, your freight provider may be using an autonomous ship. They may need to tell you they're using an autonomous ship. They may not. I think a very core question to ask here, especially given, Edmund, that you just pointed out, these autonomous ships are experimental and not cost competitive, is perhaps evaluating your freight provider and saying, are these the people I want to be in business with if they're giving these autonomous ships and not really getting a cost savings in return? More broadly, I think that's what I would say is my message to the procurement profession here, which is, I think again and again, you can get very deep into the details of failure modes, of ethics constraints, of different ways in which autonomy can be helpful or harmful. And I really just urge you to evaluate these things holistically and think about how do you create the right structure of accountability around deployed autonomy, rather than being too nuanced and trying to go into the depths of how do I make sure that I have a procedural approach to reduce risk. I think overall, autonomy has the ability to create a lot of value for the world, and we should judge it by the value it creates, not by the number of check boxes it can check.
Hear, hear. And thank you for that inspiring and potentially sobering message. Charlotte, you're going to get the last word, but I want to pass it over to Dr. Ben to any ruminations on the topic of ships, but also anything you want to sign off, this being the third in our 3-part series.
Yeah, that was delightful, and thank you for all these scenarios. I do not have anything in particular to say about ships, but I am interested in commenting on Ben's last insight, because I do think the holistic model of evaluation, there's a certain extent to which, right, like we are evaluating these things economically, and so when we ask questions about how and why we are deploying these systems, and ultimately the decision making for both the companies that you plan to partner with and your own organization come down to economic decisions. And so to that extent, it is reasonable to evaluate them economically. as long as there is not risk of harm to humans, right? If we're talking about damage to freight, I think go ahead and make economic decisions till the cows come home. When it comes to physical bodily harm to humans, I think that is the type of scenario that warrants a deeper level of scrutiny, where we're really asking companies to foreground their practices in a very deep and careful way. And so that is what I will leave this discussion with. Thank you all so much.
And
Hear,
just
hear.
last
Yes,
words
Charlotte.
from my side. I think the discussion is definitely long, not over, and I look forward to many more discussions just on this exciting topic, how it will evolve. And yeah, thank you so much for the last hour. It was a delight to be here.
Well, thank you, Charlotte. And with that, we are going to bring the topic to a close. And Matt, I'm going to pass it over to you as our host for this webinar. We're happy to have had the opportunity to present to your community. I know Sustainable Procurement Pledge has a growing membership and big ambitions. So I'll turn it over to you for us to sign off.
Great, thank you. So a huge thank you to you, Edmund, and to Dr. Ben and Dr. Charlotte and Ben for this amazing topic in the last two that we've had. Very excited that we're able to do that in partnership, and looking forward to seeing how we can work together more into next year. One of the things, the next couple of sessions that we're going to set up as a chapter is really around how to support category managers and looking at value chain, and also to see how we can help category managers around the upstream orchestration layers and what they can do. So that'll come out in sort of the first quarter of next year. But for this, thank you all for your time, and appreciate it. And Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Thanks.